this computer, and then we'll go back to share. When we talked about the oral tradition last time, we talked about the development of Jewish law from the time of the Mishna through the Gemara, which is called the Talmud, and how it continues with the Amoraim of the Talmud and the Savoraim to the Geonim to the Rishonim, till we get to the Shulchan Aruch, the code of Jewish law. Right? I seem to recall that before Hanukkah. Now what I'd like to talk about is the Bible commentaries, which appear for the first time in the 11th century. In the 11th century, and how come, if the Torah was given approximately 1,500 years before the Common Era, why did it take until the 11th century to have Bible commentaries? And what happened before that? What happened before Rashi came along on and started writing commentaries on the Bible? So, okay, the obvious thing, which I think I mentioned once, is that first you had translations, traductia. And the first translation, of course, we know historically, was the translation of the Septuagint, the translation of the 70 into Greek during the time of Ptolemy, Philadelphus, which is somewhere maybe 300 or 280 before the Common Era. And we have the letter of Aristias, which I mentioned in the Apocrypha, and also the Talmud and Megillah, which mentions the story of the translation of the 5 books of the Torah into Greek. That translation being forced on the Jews was not popular. And there were even those who declared a fast day on the 5th day of Tevet, which happened to be last week, which was the day supposedly that the translation of the Septuagint was given to Ptolemy the king. So we had groups which didn't think it was a good idea, but I would say historically, obviously, it would have been better if we kept the original because it would have been very interesting to see. Now it was kept by the church, by the Catholic Church, which I guess we should show gratitude to that. But whenever things are kept and then translated into various languages like Latin, you never really know if people got involved and changed it from the original or not. And that's why, even though it is used, let's say, in comparative Bible scholarship, it's not so much used in Judaism from a traditional point of view. But for Bible scholarship, it's very interesting, some of the things that we find in the Septuagint. So translations we have even after the Septuagint. The first translation we have, which was sanctioned by the rabbis, is a translation of Onkelos. I might have mentioned that. Onkelos, which according to our tradition was a proselyte, he converted to Judaism. By his name, you see he has a Greek name, Onkelos. He writes this somewhere in the 1st century of the Common Era, and he translates the Bible into Aramaic. Aramaic, by the 1st century, is a language which is well known in Judea, and both before and after the destruction of the temple. And it's also a Semitic language, so it's easy to make a translation because as a Semitic language, the words will be close to the original. So it's an easy way to translate. It's sometimes harder to translate into a language which is not Semitic, because then you have to think the jargons and the ways people talk in that language and translate it that way. Just to give you an example, Maimonides wrote his Guide to the Perplexed in Arabic, what we call Judeo-Arabic, which was Arabic that he wrote with Hebrew letters, but it wasn't Arabic. The book was translated eventually by Samuel ibn Tibon into Hebrew in order that non-Arabic speaking Jews would be able to read the book. So anybody who was in Spain under the under the Muslim conquest would be able to read the book, but other people would not. Even the people in Christian Spain who didn't speak Arabic would not know how to read the book. So Samuel ibn Tibbon, during Maimonides' lifetime, translates the book into Hebrew. And he explains that when he does his translation, he doesn't translate word to word, he translates the ideas. Because he says when you translate word for word, sometimes it comes out differently in that language. You have to think the way it would sound correctly in the new language in order to be compatible to the old language. So that's just something comes to mind. So when you have a Semitic language, translating a Semitic language, there is a certain advantage there. So Onkelos is the first translation. After Onkelos, we have translations of Jonathan ben Uziel. He is somebody from the 2nd century of the Common Era. He has a translation both on the 5 books of Moses and on the prophets. There's a slight mix-up here because there was another translation which was called the Jerusalem's translation, Targum Yerushalmi, and that translation is also in Aramaic, and similar to Jonathan ben Uziel, it also uses ideas from the Midrash, from the rabbinic literature in the translation, which Onkelos hardly does, only when he's really stuck, but normally he does not do that. And because of that, there's some places where it's not clear which one was a translation of Jonathan ben Uziel and which one was the translation of the Targum Yerushalmi, an anonymous translation from almost the same time. And then there's another translation which was done during the time of the Geonim, which was called the Pshitata, which was also on Aramaic translation to the Bible during the time of the Geonim. So translations were all Aramaic. Translations into other languages are actually done mostly by the church. The various churches translate the Hebrew Bible into many languages, together with translating the New Testament into many languages. So that the early translations, let's say from, I'm not sure when the first is, but as Christianity takes over Europe, let's say during the time of Charlemagne, and after that, so then the translations of the Bible are done into various languages, and eventually the Jewish Bible, which is called the Old Testament, by Christians, also makes its way into various countries and to various languages. In modern times, let's say after the Emancipation, then you have the first time the Jews start translating the Bible into other languages, like, for instance, German, English, French, etc. And you'll also find a translation of the Bible which was done into Yiddish, but it was done mostly for people who, were not scholars and didn't understand the Hebrew language. We know that the translation of Onkelos was used in synagogues in Babylonia from the 2nd century on, and it was actually used in the synagogue during the service. They would read one verse in Hebrew, and then the same verse in the translation into Aramaic, then the next verse in Hebrew, then translation into Aramaic. This tradition is still kept by Yemenite Jews, and they refer to it as Tarjum, or in Hebrew, Targum, which means translation. So we had translations, but what else was there before the 10th century? There were also what was called the Midrash. Now, there's 2 types of Midrash, and I pointed that out earlier. There's 2 types of Midrash. Let me go back a moment. You'll see the 2 types. One is called Halachic Midrash, legal Midrash. Should be here somewhere. Maybe I wrote it at the end. Yes. A Midrash, names of Midrash are names from the times of the Tanaim, the times of the Mishna. You have Halachic Midrash and Agadic Midrash. Halachic Midrash are the various laws and how they are derived from the Perikop of that week. And it's sequential, chronological, through the 5 books of Moses. So you have Midrashim on 4 out of the 5 of the Pentateuch. Because on Genesis, there's basically no laws. It's mostly stories. You have on Exodus, it's called Mechilta. You have on Leviticus, called Torah Kohanim. You have on Numbers, Sifra. Again, on Deuteronomy, Sifrei. These are the halachic midrashim. But what's more important to our discussion is you have what's called agadic midrashim, which means midrashim which are interpreting the verses of the Bible without referring to Jewish law, referring to ideas and explanations and also stories that they bring. So these midrashim also filled the gap of things that people would look to when they wanted to understand the stories of the Bible, in addition to the translation that they had from either Unclos or Yonatan. Therefore, it's not surprising that Yonatan brings a lot of the midrashim, of the Agadic midrashim, within his translation. However, before the 10th century, you don't have a run-along, simple translation of the Bible, meaning what do the words mean? What is the context? Let's just understand the simple meaning of the story. That seems to be lacking. And this is what starts in the 10th century. In the 10th century, during the time of what we called the Rishonim, the early rabbis of the countries outside of Babylonia, this is not only do we have legal codifiers of the Talmud, but we have for the first time biblical exegesis, which means Jewish Bible scholars who are interested in the simple meaning of the text. Why the simple meaning? Why not other things? Because number one, this was lacking. There were translations. Rashi uses Unclos a lot in his commentary. But all the early commentaries of the 10th century and 11th century are all interested in the simple meaning. Rashi is the best known. In addition to Rashi, you have a fellow who lives at the same time of him and actually publishes first, and his name is Isaac Chorshor. Isaac Chorshor is also in France, like Rashi. Rashi was born in Worms, today Germany, and then moved to Troyes in France. And that's where he spends. He also almost experienced the first crusade, but he saw the soldiers passing by his city on the way through Germany, on the way to the Holy Land. His grandson, who's called the Rashbam, that's his nickname, also writes a commentary on the Bible, trying just to understand the simple meaning of the text. Vadia Sforno from 14th century Italy basically does the same. Abraham Ibn Ezra from 11th century Spain also tries to understand the simple meaning of the text and also the meanings of words, the etymology of words. Radak, which is David Kimchi, is also 14th century, trying to understand the simple meaning of the text. His name. Sonides, who is until now you have the simple commentaries. There are more simple commentaries than this, but these are some of the major ones. There's also another one called Chizkuni, which is actually 12th century. Forget his name, I can look it up. Very often we remember them by the names of their books. And let me just think for a moment, somebody else. There are others. But these are the first commentaries being written, which are trying to explain the simple text. Why does this happen? Reason number one, I mentioned before, there's a lack of simple commentaries. So it fills a gap. Reason number two is that if you remember, in the 10th century, there was a movement in Babylonia which was called, actually the 9th century, movement in Babylonia, which was called the Karaites. Ra'im. Karaites. Karaites comes from the Hebrew word mikra, which means Bible. Mikra, something that you read. Bible is something that you read. So Karaites, from the word mikra, were a movement in 9th century Babylonia, a Jewish movement, against the oral tradition. Let's call them fundamentalist Jews. They wanted to go back to the text of the 5 books of Moses and just keep the Judaism of the text without the traditions that were passed down. The first Karaite was Anan ben David. Like a lot of movements, it possibly started with a political fight between Anan ben David and the head of the Jewish community in Babylonia. But in any event, it becomes a popular movement for a few hundred years in Babylonia. It actually continues almost still today, but just not in large numbers. There are still Karaites in Israel. You have in Ramleh, in the old city of Jerusalem, but in very small numbers. There were Karaites, though, over the centuries. You had Karaites in the Crimea, in the former Soviet Union. So, I mean, anyhow, so this starts with Anan ben David. The Karaites, who only wanted to believe in the simple meaning of the text, so they had no use for the Midrash. They did have use for the translations, let's say, of Onkelos, but definitely not for the Midrash. And so since they didn't believe in the Talmud or the Mishnah, they didn't spend their time reading it. So what do they spend their time doing? They spent their time writing commentaries on the 5 books of Moses and the rest of the Bible, the rest of the Hebrew Bible. Most of their commentaries, since we're talking about the 9th century in Babylonia, where the lingua franca is now Arabic and not Aramaic, so most of their commentaries are in Arabic. Many of them were found in the Cairo Geniza, and can be found today in Cambridge University. The Cairo Geniza, for those who know, was discovered originally at the beginning of the 20th century by Solomon Schechter, who was actually from Romania and Moldova. Then he went to England to do his doctorate in university, discovered this Cairo Geniza, which there was like a wealth of documents that was found from the time of Maimonides, 12th century and 13th century, etc., and wrote on that. And then he went to New York, where he became the head of the Jewish Theological Seminary for about 20 years, 15 to 20 years, until he passed away. So what happens is, the first reason then for the need to have the simple meaning of the text is because the Karaites used to argue that the text was not according to the rabbis. The simple meaning is the way they interpret it. So you needed defenders of the rabbinic approach, and some of these people, like Abraham. Sorry, I knocked something over. Like Abraham ibn Ezra, and a few others, use the opportunity to explain why the Karaites are mistaken. Abraham ibn Ezra mentions the Karaites' commentaries very often. Another one who does it, not on every verse, is Sadia Gaon, who mentions it specifically in his Emunot V'Deot, his opinions and beliefs, and in his letters. He argues with the Karaites a lot. But on the Bible, it's specifically Abraham ibn Ezra. That is one of the needs, to have somebody who's going to explain it from the rabbinic position and not the position of the Karaites. The second reason is that at the 10th century, this is already more than 100 years after Christianity has taken hold in Europe. And therefore, you now have Christian Bible commentators not only on the New Testament, but also on the Old Testament, specifically in France and England. And if we take, for instance, Isaac Bechor Shor, his commentary, he's also 11th century, like Rashi, he very often will mention some of or allude to the Christian commentators, and sometimes have a conversation or even a controversy with them in his commentary on the Bible. So these are things that, let's say, spur the need to have simple Bible commentaries. Three things. Number one, the lack of simple Bible commentaries. Number two, the controversy with the Karaites. Number three, the theoretical controversy with Christianity. I say theoretical because they are living in Christian countries, so it's basically for your people, and it's not a public polemic like they had in Spain. Now, because you have Bible commentaries which are the simple meaning, so people start writing other Bible commentaries. So you eventually, in biblical exegesis, you have about 4 different types of Bible commentaries which develop. One is called simple meaning. In Hebrew, pshat, simple meaning, simplu. The second is midrashic commentaries, which means it's a commentator, but he will follow the line of the midrash, the rabbinic interpretations, and try to explain how that harmonizes with the simple meaning. So I call these midrashic or rabbinic commentaries. Rabbinic in the sense that they're using the rabbinic material from the midrash. The third type is philosophic, meaning the philosophic biblical commentators are interested in the interface between philosophy and the Bible. So very often people like Maimonides, Levi ben Gershon, Gersonides, will try to give a philosophical point of view of the text. Just for an example, if the Bible says in Genesis that God created man in his image, so the philosophic commentator will say, well, God doesn't have an image. So if God doesn't have an image, how can he create man in his image? So the philosopher will say, obviously, what it means is that God gives man something which is above all of other creation, which is the intellect. So the intellect, in a sense, is the godly part of man in the sense that it reflects something that nothing else in creation has. So this Maimonides will say, and this Gersonides will say, and Avadia Sforno will say, and others, and actually even Unclus. And the third type of commentary will be Kabbalistic. Meaning commentators that, aside from discussing the simple meaning of the text, will also bring a Kabbalistic approach to the text. Among these, we have, I mentioned them earlier, we have Nachmanides, who is both simple and philosophic, simple and Kabbalistic. And you also have Bachya ben Asher. On every verse, we'll say this is the simple meaning, this is what the Midrash says, this is what the Kabbalah says. And others. Another Kabbalistic Bible commentator is Nachem Kanati. His book is usually read by itself because it's extremely Kabbalistic. He's not that interested in the simple meaning so much, the verses. Okay, is that clear? Is that claro a little bit? Anybody? Once? I lose you?
It's okay, fine.
Again, there are 4 different types of Bible commentaries. The first one is simplu, the simple meaning of the text. Number 2 is rabbinic, meaning the rabbinic midrashim, to make harmony between the simple meaning and the rabbinic midrashim. Rashi, by the way, is the best example. He does it all the time. Even though he claims, no, I don't use the midrashim unless they agree with a simple text, but he brings more midrashim than anybody else. So he's the best example. Number 3, the philosophic. Maimonides is a great example, but Maimonides does not write a run-along commentary on the Bible. But in his various writings, he mentions things which are always a philosophic approach to the Bible, and Gersonides too. Gersonides, in his commentary to the book of Job, he turns it into a philosophic discussion of the problem of evil. So, just as an example. And then I said, and the Kabbalistic is, which we find in Nachmanides, and I mentioned also Bachya ben Asher and Menachem Kanati of Italy, are basically using either Zoharic texts or early Kabbalistic ideas and explaining difficult issues in the biblical text from that point of view. So these become four different ways of commentaries on the Bible. You could add a fifth one, which is Philo of Alexandria of the first century, who explains the Bible allegorically. But since he's the only one in that school of thought, but he's really the only one who does that. But yes, for him, allegories are very important. Even the Hasidic commentaries on the Bible would be under the rubric of Kabbalistic commentaries, because usually that's where they're taking their ideas from. But if you want, you could create also a new category if necessary. Okay, now that we passed that, if we did, I want to go on to the first of the rabbinic sources that I wanted to bring. If you remember, we talked about the Talmud, and the Talmud has two parts. Part number one is the Mishnah, which was the first attempt to write down the oral transmission, traditions. And the second part is the Gemara, which is discussions of the Mishnah. Gemara is a very logical discussion. And so a lot of the ideas which are found in the Gemara are discussions. So sometimes it's hard to bring these to beginners without saying more. But the Mishnah sometimes is more concise, and the Mishnah deals with various topics. There's one book of the Mishnah which does not deal with Jewish law. It's called the Ethics of the Fathers. It's basically sayings and ideas about life. It can remind one a little bit about sort of like Lao Tzu, right? In his this idea of sayings, brief ideas about life. That's really what you find in Pirkei Avot. Sometimes you'll find also a few opinions, because that's the style of the Mishnah, but it's all on non-legal issues. So this is what I'll bring now. These are just excerpts. It's not the whole thing. Okay, Mishnah Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 1. I'll look at some of these excerpts. I have it also in Romanian. Okay, s'il vous plaît, if somebody wants to read it. Hillel and Shammai are first century. Someone would like to read 12? Anybody? S'il vous plaît?
Ok, al 3.
Ok.
Hillel și Shammai au primit tradițiile de la ei, de la profesorii lor. Hillel obișnuia să spună: să fiți precum un discipol al lui Aaron, un iubitor de pace, un căutător al păcii, unul care iubește toate ființele și le atrage mai aproape de Tora.
Yes. So Hillel and Shammai. Hillel was the president of the Sanhedrin, the high court in Jerusalem, during the first century, while the temple was still standing. Shammai, and Hillel was a descendant of King David. There became a tradition. Once the Jews saw that the Romans were making difficulties and there was already no Jewish king by the first century. I mean, Herod was before the first century. And also they saw that it was a matter of times that things would just get worse. So they decided that the head of Sanhedrin would be from the Davidic lineage, Davidic dynasty. And Hillel was one of those. Shammai was not the president, but he was what's called the head of the court. He was the head of the court of the Sanhedrin, and both of them ran that judicial body. So Hillel said, be like the students of Aaron, Aaron meaning Moses' brother. Ohev shalom, to love peace. Rodev shalom, to actively pursue peace. Ohev dabriot, to love people, and to bring them closer to Torah, umekarvan la Torah. Now, there's a difference between somebody who loves peace and pursues peace. Because you can love peace, but there's no peace, not my problem. So somebody who pursues peace, they figure, this is my problem. We have to solve the problem so that we actually have peace. That's the difference between loving peace and pursuing peace. And then you have loving people and bringing them close to the Torah. What does that mean? It was Rabbi Yehuda Kook. He was the son of the famous Abraham Isaac Kook. One said Hillel says you should love people and bring them close to the Torah. He doesn't say love people in order to bring them closer to the Torah. You know, sometimes you have religionists of all different religions who they think that it's so important to bring people close to their religion that the end is justified, the end justifies the means. So no matter what you can tell them, it doesn't have to be true. It doesn't have to be, could be a lie, it could be this, but as long as you get them to be part of the religion. Hillel doesn't say that. Hillel says, first, just love people. It is a character trait by itself. Love people. So how do you love people? You love people when you realize that you're not perfect. Because if you're not perfect, then if they're not perfect, they're like you. If I think I'm perfect and everybody else isn't, why should I like them? I'm perfect, they're not. So the first thing is to realize that we're not perfect. And then you can understand that the other person too could be somebody who might be like you. You know, as in Hebrew, I think I mentioned this, but I don't remember. In Hebrew, the word rachamim, which is compassion, comes from the Hebrew word rechem, which is the womb where the baby is for 9 months. The womb, I don't know how to say the womb in Romanian.
Femeie.
Yes. So you have the word in Hebrew, rechem, resh, chet, mem, is the same root as the word rachamim, which means compassion or mercy. Because what is the rechem? It's a human being learning to include a little human being in their lives. What is compassion? It's a human being learning to include in their mind another human being, to have compassion for them, even if they don't get anything out of it economically. So these are two words which are similar. Rechem, the womb, and rachamim, compassion. There was a Jewish Lithuanian-born philosopher who became very popular in France, Immanuel Levinas. And Levinas was a student of Husserl before the war, and the phenomenologist. He also studied together with Martin Heidegger, but they parted ways after the war. And Levinas once said about It says in the Hebrew Bible, as it does also in the New Testament, it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." However, in the New Testament, it says that there are two basic ideas: to love your neighbor as yourself and to love God. In the Hebrew Bible, in Leviticus chapter 19, it says, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am God." So Levina says, what does that mean? Love your neighbor as yourself. I am God. It sounds like because I am God. So the way Levinas explains it is like this. He says, it's not easy to love your neighbor. Definitely not like yourself. That's asking a lot. But any love for your neighbor is difficult because human beings tend to be egocentric. We care about ourselves. We love ourselves. If we have any other love for anything else, it's only our families. So we have very little left for the stranger. So Levinas says, love your neighbor as yourself means when a human being realizes that there's somebody else outside their world, meaning outside their small world, there's another human being that also has pain, that also suffers, that also cries and laughs like them. When they become aware of that, that awareness, that ability to transcend your egocentric circle, then the next step is knowing that God also exists. Because you learn how to move out of your ego, and then you can feel around to see if maybe, aside from human beings, there's also God. But if you live your whole life in your ego, and that's it, then you won't find other human beings, and you won't find God. There'll only be yourself and the very few who you allow to interfere in your ego. So that's an idea of Emmanuel Levinas. What does it mean, love people and bring them close to the Torah? If it's not a means to an end. No. If you love somebody and there's something you believe in very deeply, you're going to want to share it with them. But not in the sense that they have to do it. No. If they like it, they like it. They don't like it, they don't like it. But if you love something deeply, you're going to say to your friends and your family, wow, I discovered this. Let me tell you about it. That's it. Not more, not less. Okay, let's go to the next one now. I have to just look at the English for a moment to remember which one it is. And they'll go back. A moment. Here it is. Okay. This is another statement of Hillel. Where to go? Okay. Number 13.
El mai obișnuia să spună, de asemenea, unul care își proslăvește propriul său nume își distruge numele. Unul care nu progresează decade și acela care nu învață merită să moară, iar unul care face uz personal de coroana Torei va pieri.
Okay, I have to look again. This is a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
What happened? He says, he would also say, Hillel, one who advances his own name, destroy his name. Which means when a person is so egotistic that they just want their name everywhere, that will destroy your name. Because honor is not something that you can advance. Honor is something that people have to feel respect for you, honor you. So when you honor yourself, that doesn't work. You know, there are a lot of people, some certain people who are rich, they want to give money to the hospital so they can see their name on the wall. They want to give money to the synagogue so that their name is right next to the ark of the Torah. They want People want to see their name all over the place, so they advance themselves by their own means. That doesn't make them popular among people. It makes them popular maybe among the people they gave the money to, but that's not real. It's just a response because they're hoping they'll get more. It says that kol haboreach min hakavod masigoto. A person who runs away from honor will catch up to them. But if you pursue honor, you'll never get it. If you run away from honor, then it catches up to you, because then, or at least it might catch up you, I would say, because then people realize that there is an honorable thing and you're not trying to market it. It just happens to be the way you are. There's a story about a student goes to his teacher, says, "Teacher, my whole life I've been running away from honor, but it never caught up to me. So what am I supposed to do?" How do you say honor in Romanian?
They say what?
Onoare. Okay. So I was okay. So he said fame, and I've always run away from fame and honor, but it never catches up to me. So the teacher said, "Well, the problem is you're running away from it, but you keep looking back to see if it catches up to you." And that's why it never does. So, yeah. Okay, so one who advances his own name destroys his name, because nobody takes it seriously. They'll pretend to take it seriously, but they do not. One who does not increase, meaning studying, diminishes, both when it comes to Torah and when it comes to wisdom. If you stand in one place, you go backwards. Because, well, knowledge in Torah is a little bit different, but in knowledge is because knowledge increases all the time. In any field you are, if you're a doctor and you don't read the literature of what's been discovered in medicine, you're not a good doctor, because you're behind current events of what's happening. You have to keep reading. You have to know what's coming up so that your patients will get, even, you graduated 25 years ago. If 25 years you haven't read anything, unfortunately, you're not going to be a good doctor. You have to keep up reading every new thing that comes out in your field in order to know, be ahead of the game. So in Torah, it's like that too, because there's a vast amount of knowledge for an individual. So if you don't try to increase your knowledge and understand more, in the end, you're not going to remember everything, and then you'll start sliding backwards. So a scholar of Torah, he says, also has to increase their knowledge constantly so that they don't diminish. One who does not learn is deserving of death, which means, this is, of course, a metaphor. It's not real. As I said, this is not a legal text, which means if you feel that you're here in this world because you can change it by understanding things which others cannot, then if you don't do it, you're not fulfilling the reason why you're in this world. Just give examples outside the Jewish world. Let's say I don't know. Let's say Einstein was a genius, of course, in physics. Let's say he preferred to watch television and go fishing. He actually did go fishing. Let's say he spent all his time doing that instead of making new discoveries in physics. We would have all lost out. And the bad stuff, like the atom bomb, somebody else would have discovered. But the good stuff, nobody would have discovered, because, great minds, they get paid, unfortunately, sometimes for the bad stuff. But the good stuff is the stuff they discover because of their own curiosity. So I'm just saying, a lot of things, you could be the greatest one in a certain field, but if you're not going to spend time in that field, then if Leonard Bernstein didn't spend time writing music for the theater and the arts, we'd be way behind. I'm just giving one example, but I'm just saying, if so that, if Ludwig Beethoven said to himself, you know what? I'm going deaf. Forget about music. Again, it would be our loss. But this is a man who kept going despite the fact that he was losing his hearing and lost it completely eventually. So when you have a gift, if you don't use that gift, it's almost like your life was superfluous because you had something and you kept it from everybody else. You have it for yourself, but it's also a blessing for mankind. So when you do not increase, you diminish. And when you do not learn, and I'm applying this to all things, not just the learning of the Torah, but when you have that ability and you don't use it, you make your life superfluous because you know why you're there, what the reason is for you to be there. And one who makes personal use of the crown of the Torah shall perish. This is a very interesting statement. You're not allowed to use the study of Torah for personal benefit. Just like God gave the Bible, Ten Commandments and the Bible to the Jewish people and eventually to the whole world, and he gave it for free. He didn't charge anything. So when we teach it, it's supposed to be for free. You know, there's an interesting discussion in the Talmud where the Talmud says, well, if you teach Bible for free, then what are you going to do in the schools? Don't you have people teaching the children? If they do that for free, how are they going to eat? So, a person needs an occupation. So the Talmud says, well, what you do is you calculate the time that the person who's teaching Torah spends doing that. You calculate how much they would have made in menial labor, if they were a laborer, if they were a guard guarding over the field or something like that, and that's what you can pay them. You're paying them for their time and not for the fact that they're teaching Torah. But here, of course, it's going even further than that. There always are people who want to benefit from Torah scholarship to show how important they are, how everybody needs to talk to them, etc., etc. And the Mishnah is warning against this. Now, Torah is not for your own benefit. It belongs to God. And if you have the merit to be one of the exponents of the Torah, be happy about that. But it's not to make you such a popular person. That's not the goal. There's a story about two fellows. We'll call them Reuven and Shimon. And both of them studied in the same academy together, in the same yeshiva. And both of them become rabbis. For some reason, everybody goes to Reuven to ask his advice, and nobody goes to Shimon. So one day, Shimon says to Reuven, Reuven, my brother, we grew up together, same teachers, studied together. How come everybody goes to you and nobody goes to me? Reuven says, I'll tell you why. He says, why? He says, because I am constantly thinking about the verse in the book of Psalms, which says, Shiviti Hashem lenegdi tamid. I constantly put God in front of me at every moment, meaning I think about God in front of me in every moment. Oh, no, excuse me, I ruined it. I haven't told that story for a long time. Again, Reuven says to Shimon, he says, I'll tell you why people come to me. They come to me because I can read thoughts. That's what he says. I'm sorry, it's been a long time. He says, they come to me because I can read their thoughts. So Shimon says, okay, what am I thinking? He says, I'll tell you what you're thinking at this moment. At this moment, you're thinking of the verse in Psalms, I place God before me at every moment. So Shimon says, I wasn't thinking about that at this moment. So Reuven says, that's why the people come to me. That's the story. I'm sorry I ruined it the first time, but I finally got it right. Which means he does it for heaven's sake and not for his own sake. So places God before him. There used to be a movement in Eastern Europe, specifically in Lithuania, in the 19th century, a Jewish movement. It was called the Musar movement, Musar. It was started by Israel Salanter. It was a movement which was trying to bring back the study of ethics and the betterment of virtues and working on yourself into the world of the yeshivot, into the world of the Torah academies, the Musar movement, and actually set up a whole line of yeshivot, which would study their material about how to refine character traits and things like that. The Musar movement. And in fact, there's a story because the idea they were afraid that people were getting too much into legal text and were forgetting the basic Jewish ethics. Like there's a story about a woman who came to, there was a story that it was before Passover. And the people who make the unleavened bread, the pain azim, the matzah, came over to Israel Salanter and said, tell us what we should think about when we're making the matzah for Passover. What should we think about? So Israel Salanter said, what you should think about is, so the man meant, meaning, are there special names of God? Are there special Kabbalistic incantations we should be thinking about when we make the matzah? So Israel Salanter said, well, how about the widow? The man didn't understand. What do you mean the widow? What's the connection between the widow and making matzah? Israel Salanter says, I'll tell you what the connection is. I know where you live. On your street, 2 doors away from you, there's a widow who lost her husband just half a year ago. She doesn't have a lot of money. So when you're making matzah, you should make sure to give her an extra box. That's what you should be thinking about. So that was the Musar movement of Israel Salanter. They were trying to bring back what we call the basic, moral thinking to people who sometimes get lost in the world of legalities. So, why did I mention that? Let me get back to this. So there's a story also of 2 fellows from the Musar movement. Because, even when you have movements that are trying to help you refine your character traits, people are people. So it was 2 days before the fast of Yom Kippur, the major fast day in the Jewish year. And 2 young students are walking through the streets of Navardak, where they had a famous Musar yeshiva, and they were students of that yeshiva, of that academy. And the first one says, Yossi, I was thinking about things this past year before Yom Kippur, and I realized I made so many mistakes this past year. I had so many sins. I'm like nothing. I'm like worthless. In the Musar movement, I have to say that they had this idea of trying to counter your ego. It was one of the ideas, try to overcome your ego. So he says, Yossi, I have to tell you, I feel totally worthless. I've done all these mistakes. So Yossi turns to the first guy, Moshe, says, Moshe, I was thinking the same thing. This whole year, I've done so many mistakes. I'm like even worse than worthless. I'm like nothing. And there's a shopkeeper is listening to them. He says, I can't believe it. These 2 scholars are calling themselves nothing. I, a simple shopkeeper who don't even study Torah or anything, I must really be a nothing. So Yossi turns to Moshe and says, hey, Moshe, look who's calling himself a nothing. If you understand the idea. Yeah. In other words, there can be even arrogance within humbleness. Let me put it that way. Yeah. Okay, let's get back then to the ethics of the fathers. So that was number 13. And number 14 is a little more complicated, but it's very interesting. This is also Hillel. And it's a very famous statement of Hillel. Let's find it right here. Oh, I'm going in the wrong direction again. Here it is. Just at 13, right? So now it's 14. Okay, 14. S'il vous plaît.
El mai obișnuia să spună de asemenea, dacă eu nu mă îngrijesc de mine, cine se preocupă de mine? Și dacă eu mă îngrijesc numai de mine, ce sunt eu? Și dacă nu acum, atunci când?
Yes. This really sounds like Lao Tzu. It almost sounds like Zen Buddhism. So let's go back to this. Im ein anili mili, which means if I am not for myself, then who is?
The
The first thing in life is you have to take care of yourself because nobody else will do it. Okay, sometimes people live in large families and there are people that like them. It's good. It's good to have a lot of altruistic people, but sometimes you have a family and the family doesn't care about you either. I know stories like that too. So the first thing you have to know in this world is that if you're not for your own self, then who do you expect to be for you? So if I'm not for myself, who am for me? Who is for me? So first of all, I have to believe in myself and I have to try to help myself because God gave me the gift of having an able body and an able mind, and I have to take care of myself. That's number one. But in addition to that, if I'm only for myself, what am I? If I'm only egotistic and I only care about myself, then as a human being, what type of human being am I? Because part of being a human being is to be, as I said, to understand that we can actually mend the world. We can do things out there. Maybe we're not going to change the whole world, but we can help people. We can help people sometimes without, it doesn't have to diminish our own lives. But everybody has 10 minutes to do something, 20 minutes to do something. And so if I'm just a person who only cares about myself and not others, what type of person am I? And if not now, when? Of course, if not now, when? We could call that carpe diem, right? Life is short. And when you keep saying hasta mañana, so if not now, when? Now is always the best time. You have an idea, do it now. In my students at Bar Ilan, I always say to them, I mentioned that Maimonides wrote his first commentary on the Mishnah at the age of 24. And that commentary is still very popular until today. Einstein wrote his first theory of relativity, also 23, 24, around then, and that made him famous. And a lot of people didn't live very long in their lives. Like, for instance, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, a famous Kabbalist, or let's take somebody who maybe you know, Isaac Luria, the famous Kabbalist of Tzfat of the 16th century. He died at the age of 34. Can you imagine if he would have waited till he was 40 to start reading and writing Kabbalah? That wouldn't have worked. So if you want to do something, do it now. If not now, when? I would also say, based on what somebody once said to me once, says, if there's somebody you love in your life, you should tell them. Okay, if you, for whatever reason, you can't, maybe, but I'm saying if you can, like your parents, like your brother, like your sister, like your children, it helps. So a lot of these things help. So let's go over this again, because I think it's, if I'm not for myself, who is for me? I do have to be a little bit self-centered, because in the end of the day, if I don't do anything for me, I can't just sit around and wait for others to do it. But on the other hand, if I become a human being who only cares about myself, then what am I? What type of human being have I developed into being? And if not now, when? And everything I want to do, both for myself and for others, this is the time. Because tomorrow you don't know what's going to be. There are pandemics, there are wars, there's famine, there's who knows what. There's the flu. There's depression. I don't know. Lots of things can happen. That's now there's another way of reading this when you look at the Hebrew, because the Hebrew lends itself to different translations. So what I just told you now is the simple meaning of the text. If you look at it in the Hebrew, it's im. Okay, I'll try to write the Hebrew. Do you read Hebrew? I'm going to write it in the Hebrew. And oops, didn't work. Let me try again. Okay, this is in Hebrew. If I am not for myself, mili. Now, I'm going to try to interpret it from, let's call it an existentialist point of view. Because in the Hebrew, you can put the comma differently, which means you can say, enani, enani, let me explain this. The word ein in Hebrew means there is not. It's also ein, which means nothing. The word ani means me, but it's the same letters as the word ein. It's just the letters are placed in a different order. Aleph Yud Nun, Aleph Nun Yud. See what I'm saying? Same letters, just in a different order. Ein or ein means nothing. Ani means me. Therefore, in Hebrew, sometimes when they refer to the I, they call it the ani. The ego is also referred to in Hebrew as the ani, the I. Im ein ani. I'm going to explain this from a totally existentialist point of view, sort of like Hasidic. If there is no I, then do I really exist? What does it mean there is no I? Who am I? Am I the sum total of the synapses of my brain? Am I a human machine? Or is there a real personality? Am I somebody beyond this machine? You know, this is a discussion today in neuroscience. What is the brain? What is the human being? If we're just the sum total of synapses within our brain, maybe we don't even have free will. Maybe there's a big matrix which just controls everything, and we think we live our lives, but we don't. So you can actually translate this differently and say, there is no I, if im ein ani, which means there's no I, there's no me, merely, then what am I if there's no me? Therefore, there must be something beyond my conscious mind, which is myself. You know, sometimes we say, this is my hand, this is my other hand, this is my nose, these are my eyes. This is inside there is my brain. Who am I? If I'm not my brain, I'm not my heart, I'm not my eyes, I'm not my hands, what am I? Because it's my brain, it's my heart, it's my thoughts, it's my emotions. So who am I? Definitely nothing tangible. Im ein ani, if there is no I, because it's nothing tangible, then who am I? You follow me
Very
what I'm saying?
philosophical,
What?
very philosophical
Yeah,
approach.
that's what I said that at the beginning. I said that at the beginning. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We don't have to continue this. I always find these very interesting. these discussions. Okay, we'll leave that. If you find it too complicated, not a problem. I'm just saying that this is another way to interpret it if you want to go a step further into the possibilities of this discussion. But the simple meaning was, if I'm only for myself, and first of all, I have to be for myself because nobody else will be. Number two, if I'm only for myself and I do nothing ever for others, what type of person am I? And the last part is, in life, there's only now. So you have to be careful because nobody knows how long we're going to be here. That's it. Yeah, that's enough of that.
Usually in Israel, no one is so philosophical about it. They all mean about this sentence like related to the needs, not to the higher level.
Okay.
But yes, there's a very interesting discussion, the way you put it.
Yeah, yes, of course. Of course. Okay, let's do another one. This time we're moving on to Shammai, who is the partner of Hillel in the first century. And we'll read one of the things of Shammai. S'il vous plaît, where did it go?
Yeah.
Number 15, Shammai.
Still me? Okay.
Unless you don't want to, anybody else?
No, I have no problem with this.
Okay.
Shammai obișnuia să spună, să faci din studiul Torei un obicei al vieții tale. Spune puțin și fă mult și să întâmpini fiecare om cu un chip plăcut.
Right. So Shammai says, make your Torah something which is consistent or constant. I can't get stuck here. Say Torah Chakeva.
Stop.
Yes. I forgot there's not that much here. Shammai would say, make your Torah study a permanent fixture of your life, which means study something every day. Don't let a day go by without studying something, and then it becomes a permanent fixture of your life. The Vilna Gaon, Elijah ben Shlomo Zalman, who lived 200 years ago, used to say that in Hebrew, a Torah scholar, we call him a lamdan, which is in the present, meaning which means somebody who is studying constantly. Lamdan is somebody, it's present tense, somebody who's studying. Because if you once studied, that's not a scholar. If you're now studying, that's a scholar. Somebody says, oh, I once studied that a long time ago. That doesn't make you a scholar. It has to be constant. You have to be involved in it constantly, and then you're developing ideas. Just like you're not going to say that somebody who stole something 20 years ago, they're a thief. 20 years ago, they were a thief. If they steal now, then they're a thief. Right? Because they might have changed their mind if they haven't done anything for 20 years. People really thieves, they don't stop, unfortunately. Yeah. So make the Torah a permanent fixture of your life. Involved in it always. That's number one. And as far as action, say little and do much. The opposite of politicians. Politicians will promise you what they're going to do. They get elected, they do nothing. So he says, you have to be the opposite. Say little, just do a lot. And receive every person with a pleasant countenance. Don't, make a sour face because somebody told you that you don't know. You don't know. I had a funny thing happen to me one time when I was in high school in Israel. So I was in 10th grade and there was a fellow in 11th grade. That would mean I was 15 going on 16. He was 16 going on 17. And he sat right in front of me. We had the study hall where in the evenings we would study. And he was right in front of me. So sometimes he would turn around and tell me how his day was, and I would listen. And I couldn't remember now anything we ever talked about. But I'm just saying, I knew that every evening we would have a little talk to this guy. His name was Avner. Okay. I finished the high school. I went on to other things. He finished the high school. He was also a year older than me, finished the year before. He went on to wherever he went on. I hadn't seen him for decades, literally for decades. Then, maybe 25 years later, I'm walking on the street in Jerusalem. I bumped into the guy Avner. He looks different. And 25 years went by. I said, how are you doing? What are you up to? He told me he was writing some documentary film I'm putting together, whatever. And he says, Rafi, I just want to say thank you. I said, thank you. Thank you for what? I don't remember doing anything. He says, you don't understand. When I was in high school, the year that you came to the high school, I was in 11th grade, said I'd lost my father in high school during that year, and nobody knew. And I'm not the type to tell people these type of things. None of the teachers asked me what was wrong with me. None of my friends asked me what was wrong with me. And you, every night, we had a discussion. Okay, while the studying was going on, but it helped me a lot that I had somebody I could talk to during that whole year. And this was so strange because I had no idea. Number one, I had no idea that his father had died. I had no idea that he needed to talk to somebody. So sometimes, as Hillel said, if you receive somebody with a pleasant countenance, without even realizing it, you might be doing the best thing for them today. Because maybe you're the first person who smiled at them or said something nice. So maybe everybody else gave them a hard time.
He must be the best secret keeper. How is it possible?
Yeah, receive every person with a pleasant countenance. Okay, sometimes you don't want to smile too much at people to get the wrong idea. But I mean, in a very gentlemanly way. What can I say? Okay, last one, and we'll call it. It says, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel is also one of the heads of the Sanhedrin after Hillel. He was one of the presidents, and also from that family. So this is the last one we'll quote from this chapter, Rabbi Shimon.
Rabbi Shimon, fiul lui Gamliel, spunea, lumea se bazează pe trei lucruri, lege, adevăr și pace. Și așa precum se spune, Zaharia 8:16, adevărul și o judecată dreaptă să instaurezi la porțile orașelor tale.
It's really Zechariah. Okay.
Zechariah.
So, this is number 18, and this is the last one we'll do. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Gamliel, said, by three things is the world sustained. At the beginning of Pirkei Avot, it says the world stands on three things. Now he says the world is sustained by three things. One is the rule of law, so that people learn boundaries, because when there are boundaries, when the law is a good system of law, when there are boundaries, it creates the maximum freedom for every individual. Because we need to be protected by the law, or else we have no freedoms. So first you need law, which does define or delineate boundaries, but at the same time, it gives the maximum freedom to every individual. Number two, you need truth. If everybody lies, there's no world anymore. We can see in the internet, whenever there's so much fake news and people just spread things over and over again, it destroys the world. Nobody knows what's right. Nobody knows what's wrong. So aside from law, you need truth. And the last thing you need is peace. Because when there is aggression, when there is violence, when there is war, the world becomes turmoil, like it's becoming at the moment. And we're hoping we'll get over this. So you need law, delineating the lines for everybody to have maximum freedom. You need truth so that the world can work in a normal way, that people know the difference between right and wrong and not being brainwashed. And you need peace, because if everybody has peace, then everybody can maximize what they want to do. As it says in Zechariah, truth and the judgment of peace you should administer in all your city gates. Okay, I think that's a good place to stop.
I would like to ask you something. It's okay?
Yeah, of course, of course.
Do you really think those times were ruled by all these golden sentences?
Do I think when you say those times, it's like this. In every culture, you have people who are scholars and thinkers and believers in truth and justice. You even have them in cultures which seem to us very backwards and very violent, because there are always going to be good people in cultures everywhere, because human beings have the ability to use their mind and to use it for the ethical reasons. That's already the Socratic idea. Socrates said that knowledge brings you to morality, unless you're going to corrupt it actively. And so the more that you have these ideas, the more these ideas are disseminated. And specifically, the more you teach them to the young generation, that they be brought up with these ideas, it becomes part of society. But unfortunately, if you bring up the young generation, like some of our neighbors here, and tell them that everybody hates you and the whole world is terrible, and therefore you have to just kill people because that's what they expect you to do, then you're destroying society. And you're not giving these young people a chance to do anything in the world because they're so filled with hatred, there's nothing they can do. So that's why you need the people to constantly disseminate the ideas and push out the knowledge. There always will be people who, even in difficult times, who will move ahead developing more and more of these ideas. But the basic ideas have to be disseminated into society, or the society won't work.
You see, I agree with what you say. That's why learning from the Torah every day, something new, and learning these basic ideas, it's vital for a civilization. And why did I ask you? Because I'm looking around and I'm not sure that even 10% are ruled by justice, by truth, peace.
Because people are people, and sometimes even people who know these ideas don't follow them. You know, the story about man comes to the rabbi and says, "Rabbi, I went through the whole Talmud. What should I do now?" The rabbi said, "Okay, you went through the whole Talmud, but how much of the Talmud went through you?" That's the question. So, you know, it's also a question of understanding the practical, how to apply these things to life. And of course, the best way to teach people is through self-example.
Agree.
So it's like the parent who says, "Listen to what I say, not what I do." It doesn't work. Children, they're smarter than that. Okay, dear friends. So I guess we'll meet next week then.
Yes. Thank you so much. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.